Good evening and welcome everyone. I am excited to host this session on Global GTM from India during pandemic. I'm really excited. At NASSCOM, we have more than 10,000 participants from 40 countries participating in this session. And we have founders, entrepreneurs who have come together to discuss how India can historically, take advantage of this opportunity that we have. So I will start with inviting Aneesh from, the founder of Capillary Technologies. If you can join me on stage, please. Hey, Aneesh.
Hi, Manav.
Session on Global GTM. Really excited to have you on the panel.
Thanks for having me here, Manav. And wishing everyone a happy new year and, great times ahead.
All right. Next, I would like to invite Bhanu from RateGain. Hey Bhanu, welcome to the session. Thanks for taking time out.
Hey Manav, hey Aneesh. How are you guys doing?
Great to have on board.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes. All right. Next, we will have to call Sparsh from Wingify. Hey Sparsh, good evening. Excited to have you here. Thank you for joining the panel.
Thanks a lot, Manav. Hey Manav, hey Aneesh, Bhanu. Excited to be here. And I wish everybody a very happy new year.
Yes, happy new year to you as well, Sparsh.
Thank you.
Can we have Rostow from X-Mindtree, now an entrepreneur in SaaS?
Hi, good evening. Very, very excited to be here. Partly to meet lots of old friends like Aneesh, who I never get a chance to see because of the pandemic, but also very excited to be back in the new edition of NPC. I have been part of NPC for many years now, and very, very happy to see it going from strength to strength. And like other people in the panel already mentioned, wishing everybody a very, very happy and healthy 2021.
Welcome, Rostow. Welcome. Great to have you on board. Can we have Joyce from Tally join the panel as well, please? All right. Welcome, Joyce, to the panel.
Thank you very much, Manav. Very, very happy to be here with friends and colleagues from across industry categories. Really looking forward to the discussion.
All right, perfect. Excited to have you, who are building the global businesses. I know that, the start of the year, last year, same time has been very tough. I know in January, China was going through this thing called COVID. Nobody thought it would become as big as, it's almost life-changing for all of us in all the aspects of thinking from business, personal to health. I hope that your family, friends, and your near and dear ones have been safe in the pandemic so far. So it's a bit more ironical, right? While many industries have gone down, especially the brick and mortar, but digital industries or tech has really gone through the roof. This market is through the roof right now. Historic valuations, the cloud companies, more companies is going to build digital narrative. All good for the industry. We have been talking about product now for almost 15 years. And I think now the time has come. We're seeing a secular trend. There are more companies, there's more investors coming in, there are more entrepreneurs starting off. And now we have, especially in India, teams from who are starting up. And I think it's a great opportunity for India to take advantage of all and really grow and scale to greater heights in the global SaaS and global community. So Aneesh, I would start with you. I would love to see get your thoughts on building companies for more than 10 years. You have seen ups and downs. You have seen the global GTM done it from India, in India and outside India. How has pandemic changed India's perspective of GTM?
Right. Thanks, Manav, for that. So, I think, obviously when the pandemic, and we 65% of our revenue comes from retail. Right. So, and retail is definitely in the top 3 or 4 sectors. With Bhanu around, I can't claim more grief than Bhanu can, but so it's obviously been quite an impacted sector, right? Retail. I think things are back to about 80%-ish for last year for most retailers. And I think how the pandemic has changed stuff, Manav, is I think decisions that would have taken in 6 months for people who want to move to digital are now getting taken in weeks, right? So, and what that's meant is, like it'll be surprising, but in months like in June, just at the end of the lockdowns, we closed to $500,000 deals sitting remotely, which I could never have imagined, right? I mean, like, forget about trying it. I would have never imagined that you can close deals in the Philippines and then, somewhere else sitting out of Bangalore, right? So I think there's definitely a change in mindset of the buyer, right? Folks know that it's very funnily, in some cases where we've told customers, like Middle East is open for business, right? Where we've said, look, we'll come and meet you. Customers have said, no, let's do it online, right? So, and again, significant, most of our deal sizes are 100K plus, right? ARR. And so I'm definitely seeing that swing. But the other side of the swing that I'm seeing is people still want to speak with locals, although it is remote. I'll give you a simple example. We've had we just opened the US at the middle of the year, saying, look, if you can sell to anywhere, then let's sell to the US as well, right? I mean, we don't have a presence in the US for the rest of you who don't know about us, right? So we've been largely Asia, India, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and China. And for the first 3-4 months, we had an ex-employee sitting out of Canada. He was running sales for us. And, we got a lot of leads, good conversations, but nothing was closing, right? 3-4 months. And then early December, we said, okay, let's get someone pre-sales in the US. And this will obviously have to be, someone local who understands the market, right? That's what you want in pre-sales. And, in the last 4 weeks, we've closed a couple of deals now. So I think although remote seems to be okay, and no physical meetings, right? I mean, the Canada-US border is as sealed as anyone can ask for, right? So, but I think having the right folks in the meeting, I think people still want to buy from people and local. I think it's still a flavor that's playing. At least that's been my learning, Manav. So I think you can sell to anywhere. But if you just want to be this, little India selling from on Zoom, I don't know if you'll be very successful. Right? I think it'll have to be a mix of, people who locally understand the context and that seems to be what's at least working for us. A mix of folks sitting out of Bangalore as well as locals in each market working together remotely.
Yeah, definitely. We are saying the same thing. Suddenly, there is a 100% virtual meeting, especially for large enterprise deals. People want to have, and what we think is, Google really gives you that something happens, somebody they can talk to, because pandemic also means that suddenly things are disappearing, and they want to see somebody who is so much next to them. Bhanu, are you seeing the same thing in travel and hospitality? Probably your sector during this time, early development.
I think, Manav, your voice is cracking. Probably we should go on mute, the rest of us who are not talking or something.
Yeah. So Manav, I got your question, and Aneesh is right. He's still, he should feel happy looking at me because, we're sort of in the midst of, we're the front and center of the storm, if you think about it. So travel and hospitality is very, very majorly impacted. But, given, I think, Manav, I always feel insanely awesome about things, and I see this as an opportunity in multiple ways. It's given us an opportunity to really invest in different kinds of products. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as sort of reinvent how we go to market. But for the benefit of the audience, I thought I'll take a minute to also reflect back and talk about how I have seen things change over sort of the last decade and a half, and share my observations with the audience, which they might find useful. Because I do feel from a GTM perspective, things are changing dramatically, and we at RateGain are also employing some of these new techniques on how you get to market. So I'll make these comments. They're in no order. So when you think about, back sort of in the late 90s, when enterprise sales was considered, it was a lot about field sales. Oracle championed that sort of phenomenon. Then came sort of enterprise. You have an inside sales team or SDRs who are given, quotas to sort of set up meetings, etc. And then, HubSpot sort of championed the whole content marketing piece. I think where we are moving now is towards the product led growth frameworks. I've become a huge fan of that. I feel you no longer are selling to a decision maker, but you're selling to the end user. So even from an enterprise sales perspective, if you can get your product out and create the momentum with the end users, you can rally them up to go back to the corporate or the decision maker to help buy your product. So we're actually witnessing that in our industry also. Some other comments I have is, world is even flatter now. It's much easier to sell out of India than it ever has been. There are examples of White Hat Junior. We've done this very, very successfully. Although we've had local teams in different parts of the world, but today we sell to every Fortune 500 travel and hospitality companies, RateGain customer, and we've done that very, very successfully out of India. And generally, when you're going, global, I would categorize the global market into sort of two buckets to keep it simple. There is US, and then there is rest of the world. So US is, I think anybody can enter that market without having really a field sales, even when you're considering enterprise sales, because, US is all about delivering an ROI, and as long as it's a very, very logical based decision making system, whereas rest of the world, Aneesh also alluded to having regional teams, and we do that too, is because I think there is still this element of trust, and you have to build relationships when it comes to enterprise sales. And so it's very important to understand who your audience is. Some are high touch, some are low touch. In case of hospitality customers, although we've been, I think the momentum is changing, but we do find a distinction between, for instance, when we look at our portfolio of customers, we sell to hotels, but we also sell to online travel agents. Online travel agents are more digital first, and because they're more technology first, we find it much easier to deal with them, and them a lot more lower touch versus high touch. So I think it's very, very important to understand who's the end customer that you're selling to, and that sort of determines your go-to-market as well. And just from a unit economics perspective, because we play in both ends of the spectrum. So we have ACVs of $1,000 going up to $1 million, and depending on what your ARPU is, the sales process needs to be adjusted accordingly, because if your ARPU is less, you need to depend more on the product-led growth framework and have more of a self-service model. The other comment is, whatever products we build now, we're very focused on building sort of open APIs, because I do believe every use case that you solve for is part of a bigger puzzle, bigger solution for the end customer. So it's very important for you to be able to fit into their technology ecosystem. So it's very, very important to not only service the product through a potential UI, but also have open APIs. I also want to comment on sort of different roles that people play. I feel like there is a convergence of different roles for you to be effective in your GTM. There is, in my mind, not truly a product person, a marketing person, and a salesperson. It's really a culmination of all three functional areas coming together. Because very recently we're launching a new product, and I can see marketing playing a huge role in how even the product is designed. Because for you to make it viral, how do you introduce virality in the product needs both hats, both the product and marketing hat. One of the other things that we've done very successfully recently, this is thanks to our industry. A lot of people lost jobs, unfortunately, that we have institutionalized a partner program. So, what we're doing is people who we worked with in the past now become consultants to us, and that's also been very, very effective. And lastly, I think for anyone trying to build a global company out of India, I think I think it's of paramount importance to build a brand, right? And because the brand establishes the trust. And so at RateGain, what we've done is, as people are, as the travel economy sort of comes back, we are publishing travel recovery reports. And I'm happy to quote, we take a lot of pride that we are an Indian company, and now we could being quoted by international media, CNN, Wall Street Journal, all the big media houses internationally are quoting our travel demand recovery indexes now. So that was a long-winded response, but I thought it was important. Sorry.
I think you brought up some key points on
Manav, your voice is still, it's not
Can
very clear.
you hear me now?
Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
Yes, sir, you brought up some important points on product-led growth and the organization, how it is changing and how functions of product and marketing and sales are coming together for growth. I'm going to come back to that. I think, Rostow, I would like to draw on your experience. You have seen many industries doing a mentoring experience, and you have seen digital transformation, creeping in slowly. And now, of course, it is a full wave. So what are your views on this?
Thank you, Manav. Some experiences are relatable from the comments that Bhanu and Aneesh made.
Rostow, I think you're on mute.
I unmuted myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Some experiences that I have seen from my world are relatable to the comments that Aneesh and Bhanu made, and some are probably different. I think to some extent it depends on whether your product or your offering is like a sort of like a specific point plug and play kind of a solution compared to the world I come from, which is IT services, which typically tends to be a little bit more fuzzy and requires more consulting kind of selling, etc. There. But a couple of comments for the audience. Firstly, I think the pandemic, reacted uniformly across the entire world very quickly, and both the buyer and the seller were equally affected. So, which is why, for example, the entire go-to-market had to be dramatically changed, because even if you did the old ways of selling, the old ways of marketing, the customer was not in the office to hear you or meet you, or you couldn't do things like taking them out for dinner to build a relationship. And the customer was also in the office. So therefore, I think the benefit of some of the comments that we heard was also because both sides were equally affected. Right? Nobody could travel, nobody could meet, nobody could be in office, etc. And therefore, the adaptability of the sort of remote kind of interactions was higher today compared to in the past. For example, if I wanted to avoid traveling and meet somebody on video, it would be not accepted easily by the customer side, because they would be in office and they would want to meet me in person. But given the environment, I think it has worked out well. I think the some of the companies have done a lot to engage with customers. Specifically, for example, I know Hexaware created a digital twin of their entire campus and made it available online, so the customer could get the experience of walking through the office, seeing the corridor, etc. Because technology is relatively easy, right? It's a combination of like a digital twin plus AR, VR, and so on and so forth there. But they sort of drank their own champagne. The kind of solutions the industry took to the customers, they drank their own champagne and created like a virtual campus and gave the feeling to a visitor of walking through the campus, standing on the corridor, seeing a plant at the whatever, in the building, etc. So I think the service providers also, imbibed the technology fairly quickly, and I think the realization genuinely also was that this world is actually more productive because you can be more efficient. I was talking to somebody in the industry, and they felt that in the previous cycle, if there was a transition to be made from another vendor or from the client team to the vendor's team, maybe 20 people ended up on a flight and did a lot of things over a long time. Versus today, for example, smaller number of people are able to accomplish transitions in a shorter amount of time. So I think it also used the experience to question some of the assumptions that we probably all adopted and followed in the past, little bit maybe blindly. And I think that benefit also has come to the benefit for both the customer and the vendor there. Finally, I think the realization that I am seeing in some of the SaaS kind of companies is that they've been able to automate deployment. Because, I mean, just to take an example, like Aneesh's Capillary solutions, in the past, for example, if it required, somebody to visit the customer, install the software, the interfaces to the customer databases and their IT landscape, etc. I think the engineering of the products have evolved today. So you can do a lot of those things remotely as well within the SaaS world. And that's been a benefit, right? Because if you sell but you can't deploy, then a SaaS company doesn't get revenues. So the improvement happened, not just from a GTM perspective in terms of sales and marketing and brand building and all the points that Aneesh and Bhanu made. But I think the benefit on the engineering improvements, automated deployment, etc., will actually stand the product company in good stead even beyond the pandemic, because these are fundamental improvements to the product, fundamental improvements to customer engagement, and therefore I think the benefits will accrue even going forward. Because otherwise, the go-to-market is always generally thought of only in terms of sales and marketing, but that only is half the question. Half the question is also to realize the revenue, you need to get the customer to engage. And I think many of the good SaaS companies have taken care of that aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Rostow. I think remote implementation is one of the biggest fundamental shifts as well, because that is also scale is required, especially for enterprises, right, which has complex IT landscapes. So, Sparsh, your business is a bit different. It's more horizontal. It's more tech oriented. So, what kind of changes that you have seen?
So, our business is always, from a GTM standpoint, was always fairly digital. Our lead generation, demand generation, as well as fulfillment, sales, and after sales would be all digital. But then, unlike Aneesh and unlike Bhanu, we also operate in a mid-market where a typical deal size would be in the range of $15,000 to $40,000. And our cost structures, and just because of the market we operate in, we were restricted to be more digital than in person. Multiple times we wanted to go slightly upmarket, and there were elements of in-person GTM, right from demand gen, going to conferences, doing some bit of branding, offline marketing, to obviously there were touch points in person from sales standpoint. And, over a period of time in the last 5-7 years, we're seeing every year the number of in-person engagement that we're doing across the globe were going up. And last year, what happened in the pandemic is, we were forced, not just us, but just to reflect, this was not because we wanted to do. Our cost structures and our systems were very optimized for digital, but just because the industry operated in an ecosystem where some of our competitors and some of the other players in the industry would demand an in-person sort of GTM, we were forced to do that. Now with pandemic coming in, what we could do is take our entire GTM play, which was very successful in the $15, $20, $30, $40,000 range, and take it up market. And we could successfully do that just because those, like Aneesh and Bhanu and even Rostow said, the customers were very open to the idea of buying online. And, to be honest, at one point in time, we almost thought that's impossible to do a $100,000 plus deal digitally without meeting in person. But last year in pandemic, we were able to close one of our biggest deals, more than $200,000 deal just digitally from India. So, there are two changes that we see. One, just because you operate in a horizontal space, our funnel usually looks very fat at the top. There's a lot of players who want to try our software, get into the funnel, and there's a lot of salespeople engaged. At any point in time, there are hundreds of open deals going on. What pandemic really did is give a lot of clarity to the end customers. We probably are not a necessity product for a lot of industries, but we help optimize their business. We don't help them run it. A lot of businesses got that clarity that do they need to focus on optimization or do they need to focus on the core business, which really helped us that a lot of those open pipelines, which will never convert, or will just be stuck on those sort of open deals with a hope that they will convert, got a lot of clarity, and our pipeline got more sorted out. Deals which really had to convert, they remained in the pipeline. A lot of them closed. In hindsight, it really helped us be more efficient internally from our sales standpoint, because we got clarity on what sort of customers really needed and what sort of customers will continue using us even in a pandemic side when things are south. The second clarity, obviously, is we could really defocus from, we had plans in 2020 to open remote offices. We, as of now, do not have any offices outside of Delhi, outside of India. And as we were doubling down in the US and Europe, we were really planning to open our local offices, sales focus offices in these regions. We could really defocus from those priorities just because we cannot do that, and really focus internally to optimize our GTM for enterprises. And that's the transition I've seen, that the gameplay that worked very well in the mid-market and failed to work in the past in the enterprise space, we could use the same sort of game plan and have some success in the enterprise play. And that's a shift in the industry, and that's the shift in the buying behavior that we have seen in industry because of pandemic.
I understand. Perfect, Sparsh. And Joyce, coming to of course, Tally has been the household name since many years now. So, and do you see the different behavior in the companies buying in India? What is your experience has been so far?
So, two observations I'll share with the audience with respect to the small and medium enterprises, which is the segment that Tally addresses. The first is actually pretty common between what is happening or happened in India and outside India also, which is that I think during the 9-10 months of the pandemic so far, at least in 2020, we actually saw two distinct behaviors in the SME segment. I think the first 3 to 4 months was very, very tough. Also from the India perspective, because the financial year end actually happened just about almost the same time that the pandemic hit and the lockdown actually entered its first month. And I think those first 3-4 months were extremely, extremely tough for the small and medium enterprises. Come June and July, when the first impact of the lockdown ended, there was this sense of euphoria, saying that look, now the worst is over and things will kind of start stabilizing. But I think by the time September and October it hit, I think the second realization set in, especially among smaller businesses, that this is not what we thought. This is different. Customers continue to be non-operational or semi-operational. And therefore, unless we take cognizance of this change, things are not going to become better. And therefore, in October, November, December, we saw a lot of consolidation and optimization measures which were taken by small and medium enterprises to manage their businesses better. So that is the first observation. The second observation is something very peculiar to small and medium enterprises. My colleagues on the around the table have shared a lot of insight and behavioral changes for medium and large enterprises. But there's a very interesting thing about small and medium enterprises, which is, and especially the smaller enterprises, they are not as IT enabled as mid or large enterprises. Their IT infrastructure is not that strong. And I think one of the big changes that the pandemic brought in is in the adoption of digital tools, specifically collaboration and optimization tools. I think Aneesh will probably vouch for this for segments or use cases like customer management tools and CRM. This was probably one of the turning points as far as the India business is concerned. Similarly, for collaboration tools, I think the acceptance and wide usage of tools like Microsoft Teams or Zoom, etc., I think kind of reached a zenith, so to say. And the good part is that they are here to stay, because the impact of the realization in October towards the fag end of the year has been that this is the way of working, and employees are going to be
seeking comfort in the work from home scenario, and therefore the way you look at employee productivity, the way you look at connecting with your teams and vendors, customers is going to change forever. And I think in a lot of sense, it's also true for markets outside India. I mean, we are seeing it in the Middle East for sure. We are seeing it in large parts of Southeast Asia, Africa. We are also seeing it in the US as a matter of fact. So yes, I think those two were kind of big learnings for us in the last 10 months.
No, absolutely, Joyce. I think now you start the company with the digital tool, right? At least a Slack or a team or the basic accounting software. So I think definitely, I think the small and medium adoption for digital tool has going through the roof, and I think it's just a start. Having heard of you, I want to pick up on few topics I think are going to be very important for the audience. And Bhanu, you mentioned term PLG, product-led growth. I know in recent times, SaaS industry has been talking about it. So let's kind of demystify that. So when you spoke about and you must mention in passing that product-led growth, bottoms up has become important to really scale and increase velocity. Can you throw light on how do you define product-led growth, and what do you mean by product-led growth?
Sure. So look, I think first of all, I shouldn't take credit for this. Has become sort of more of a industry phenomenon. I believe, if somebody wants to read up more on it, OpenView has a lot of OpenView, a VC from Silicon Valley, has a lot of content on this. But basically, the sort of heart and gist of it is you let your product do all the talking, right? So instead of focusing on, when you think about your GTM, it sort of begins with, how awesome your product is, whether there is a, they sort of rephrase from product market fit to market product fit, which is basically essentially saying, there is a habit in us, frankly, and also a lot of entrepreneurs out there to think about a product and then, sometimes maybe even artificially create the need. And, a lot of people have been successful in doing that as well. But really the point is understanding your market, what is really the need, and reversing it to say, who's the audience that I'm selling to? What's my core value proposition? How do I solve, for this problem? What is the motivation to solve for this particular problem? So once you sort of hit on that particular need, that need that exists in the market, it just basically makes everything downhill so much easier from your GTM perspective. So a lot of time can be really, really spent on identifying that particular need. And so once you have that, you sort of marry that with what channels would you really use. And, the channels could be, your paid channels that we usually think about, but there is, this now new concept of, either using user generated, call it content, like you have likes of TripAdvisor and Glassdoor, or introducing virality in the product, like you have likes of Slack and Asana, Dropbox, all of these guys who really get one user hooked and create a network effect by getting them to invite their friends, etc., so that it becomes all pervasive as the product gets used. But the bigger point that I wanted to make here is I do see a big fundamental shift in who you are selling to. So because we've been very, very focused on selling to enterprise customers for the longest time, and these are not as digital. If you look at hospitality, it's sort of like the least digital industry that exists out there. So there has always been a big need for high touch, etc. But I do feel that what B2C companies have done is change buying behavior of people, and ultimately those are the same people who are buying B2B products as well, and they expect similar kind of experience. So if you sort of focus all your energies now on the end user, you can help build a momentum that they go back. I mean, you've seen that. I mean, think about Zoom, right? I mean, nobody imagined a company like Zoom, which is, in classical B2B space with, inside sales and enterprise sales led model would, come and disrupt that industry. So my belief is, there's a large fundamental change on who you are selling to now versus who we've been conditioned to sell to.
I understand. Yeah, Aneesh, do you think, obviously there's been success, as Manu is saying, on the horizontal tools, so where product has been really successful. Do you think it is possible in a mission critical applications like yours, and where you're bringing offline stores to online? There's a lot of pilot work you do with them before the value proposition is proven. So do you think the product-led growth model can be applied there, and if yes, how?
Manav, I think product-led growth works. I think when you can use things quickly, right? And inherently, if you are a large enterprise software, it's slightly harder, right? So we've seen some cases when someone else visits a store of one of our customers and then asks them saying, "Look, what are you using?" and then calls us back, right? I mean, that's the closest we have seen to a user randomly using your product and then saying, "I want this." So where do you get this, right? So. But again, the flip side to that is, let's say you're printing out this very interesting coupon in an offline store. The brand doesn't want you to leave your name there, right? Powered by Capillary. It's just a little bit of a, and I think so there is always that conundrum of, if you're really a large enterprise play, it is white labeled, quote unquote, right? I mean, for the consumer, they don't see it. And so in our case, at best, what we've been able to do, Manav, is tell people, go to this place and check it out. And give it a feel. And given ours is a consumer-facing product, right? I mean, we run CRM and e-commerce for brands. So give them a link and say, go give it a spin, right? I think that's where it's gone to for us. But we haven't been able to, let's say if you look at the example, I mean, like a Zoom type thing, where the first time I used it, I was like, yeah, I would want to use this in the company for others, right? And there is this ripple effect in some senses. I don't think that's going to happen for very large enterprise software as much.
Yeah, so there's two schools of thought. What Bhanu is talking about and what you're talking about, and who really wins. Rostow, from your experience, do you think that, and you have a lot of experience selling to even older industries, right, which are more traditional, businesses which are more traditional in nature, right? Which find it, and user profile is also a bit on the age group is different than a really startup use cases like Slack and other companies have. So do you think this kind of approach where you try the product and then buy would work?
I think absolutely. I think given the fact that technology has evolved and the customer is a little bit more, what shall I say, under pressure to evaluate these things and make a decision, etc. There, I think the decision cycles within the customer have reduced. Otherwise, previously they would get into this traditional approach, especially large enterprises, of writing an RFP, calling a quote, and then the RFP would be sent to those people that are in the Gartner quadrant and so on and so forth. So a very mechanistic kind of approach to interacting. Now, for example, they are scrambling to fill gaps in their own sort of solution. I mean, if I would look at some of the data that I have been receiving, it is believed that 20% of revenue for any company, whether you're making shoes or hotels or whatever, will come from online channels today. And they're very unprepared for that kind of a surge in demand through digital channels. They've never sort of had to prepare for it or deal with it, right? So given and I think some of the panel members made this comment, if COVID is accelerating digital transformation within enterprises, then they're also recognizing that the traditional sort of quote-unquote procurement process for these solutions will also have to change there. And therefore, it's a function of you landing on their inbox at the time when they are now struggling with a problem, and then you having a solution that is relevant for them at a price point that's relevant for them there. So I think the willingness to engage with a broader set of stakeholders that they would have otherwise not engaged with in a process that's more accelerated, etc., I think is definitely a benefit that the product companies have realized out of this there. Secondly, given the kind of uncertainty, a SaaS kind of a model naturally appeals to the target customer a little bit more easier because you're not making long-term large commitments, right? Like an enterprise, if they wanted to do license purchases, would have been a lot more complicated. You need more approvals. Approvals are more difficult to get in a remote world, etc. Versus somebody who comes and says, try this. If you like it, buy it. And if you buy it, you're only going to pay an as you use or some kind of an outcome based or some kind of a unit based kind of pricing. So they also realize that they're not, tying themselves up into something that's very large or a very long-term commitment. So you also get I would say, like a natural tailwind for SaaS today. And like we spoke about last time, SaaS has also made deployments easier, made the try and buy things easier, etc. There. So I think some of those will definitely, are positives in the current environment.
Right, thanks. And Joyce, do you see, Tele has been obviously feet on the street model and partnerships and, getting every chartered accountant to use it. So do you see that, with everybody going digital, that model of sales would work and you go to more product-led growth model where, Tele has an online version, I try it and then buy it. What do you see that?
At this point, I'll probably say the answer to that question is no. At least for the small enterprise, that answer remains no. It continues to be a very engagement-driven and in that sense a very very face-to-face led selling. However, the fact also is that the selling is faster. The cycle is definitely faster because the decision making itself is very very fast. You only have one, maximum two people who are involved in the decision making. However, I mean, since we are talking in the context of the pandemic, I must also highlight that during the pandemic, while the need was felt for work from home and adopting, like I explained earlier, technologies for collaboration, etc., the need was expressed by small enterprises also to go digital, look for the product, understand how the product works, get your own learning, get your self-learning up and running, and eventually also buy. But is that going to be a continuous phenomenon going forward? At this point, I'll say no.
I understand. And Sparsh, I know you have been kind of a product-led growth model right from the start. So you see two different viewpoints, I think, based on the industry, geography, and the panelists have different viewpoints of product-led growth model. So how do you see that going in your industry, and what would you change? As you spoke about going to mid-size as well, right?
Yeah.
Deeply applicable there. What has been your experience, and what are you learning from product-led growth? Where it works, where it does not work?
So, I think product-led growth really worked very well in the SMB and mid-market space. And, when we started, we were completely focusing on SMB. And it was completely product-led. All the talking, as Bhanu said, was done by product. All the branding was around product. All the GTM was around product. And, we had an organic sales channel where people will put in their credit card and buy the product after doing a 30-day trial and so on and so forth. Obviously, putting a sales force inside sales team, but still keeping the entire focus on product, we could take this model to mid-market and increase our ARPUs. But we really struggled doing that in enterprise space. And that's where we started, and then, that's a different question why we want to do enterprise. But we started putting in more people, feet on street. We started attending a lot more conferences just to be out there. And the entire focus, which used to be digital, which used to be online, started slowly and steadily over a period of time shifting offline also. There's a good component that's building up offline from a branding standpoint in conferences to a feet on street sort of sales force. What pandemic could do is, really rejig all of this, really just cushion all of this and get this back to where it really, I believe, deserves to be. And even in the enterprise space, because now a lot of shift has happened digitally, and a lot of people who will discover brands in conferences from Gartners and whatnot and analysts are spending a lot more time online discovering brands. And again, the shift even in the enterprise space has been more sort of product led. So I think if I have to summarize this, largely we were always product led, but as we were scaling up, as we were growing, we realized that we have to go outside of product led also, and we have to really put field sales into place. We have to do a lot more partnership ecosystems play and a lot of different play really to scale. But now with pandemic, there's a lot more focus on product led. So that's my kind of take of it, that product led is scaling up better in this space. The key learnings have been that at the end of the day, what I believe, and at least in our industry, won't call for all the industries, is the entire value is driven by the product itself. There's very little sort of services play. There's very little other sort of play. Obviously, you can add up support and whatnot, but eventually the value our customers gain is from product. Because we were focusing on building other plays, obviously it was done at the cost of not focusing enough on the product, which really meant in the long term, the value that the product could give to the customers was getting less priority than how do we sell it and how do we service them. Now, getting back to the product, like really, had us question our product philosophies and strategies, and we doubled down last year so much more on product because we could focus on product and not focus on GTM, which eventually in the long scheme of things will end up being more value to the customers, because building those local sales and support teams probably will not add so much value than doing something big in product. So that's kind of my learning, that if you continue focusing on product, eventually that's what give value. And pandemic has really helped us and the ecosystem. We cannot operate in isolation to really focus on product, and eventually the customers will gain from it.
Thanks for this question. I think so I think what I'm hearing and my also ultimately a twin model. I think product-led growth is very good in the early stages of the company. It gives you velocity. You can test your product with SMB. But as you start scaling into larger enterprises, I think you can focus on the end user, as Bhanu and everybody, all of you are saying, users should be happier. But I think the other parts of enterprise, like what Aneesh and Rostow and everybody, Joyce is saying, are equally important, especially for support and how services are going to work for large enterprises, because their landscapes are very, very complex. So I think we are moving towards now a twin engine model. I think a lot of Indian companies, I think, will go towards product-led growth. So it's good to see the discussion and good for the audience to take a note of. I think moving on from product-led growth, and in the next section, Aneesh, you mentioned that during pandemic, you first time closed $500,000, $200,000 ARR or ACV deals sitting in remotely. So was the sales process any different than you were doing? What changes have you seen in the sales process?
I think what changes in the sales process, I think, we earlier, one thing that's definitely helped is the sales process has shortened, right? Earlier, if it took you to find a slot for a face-to-face meeting and blah, and blah, and blah, now all that is, you can take it 3x faster, right? I mean, people are more available. It's easier to get people on calls. It's easier to do like much more high-level demos also, right? I mean, earlier you would never get senior folks wanting to come in and sit into a look at the product and understand the value, right? Just, so, and hence the dinners and the drinks needed to, move the needle, right? So today, unfortunately, I think what's happened is that dinner and drink time has also gone into Zoom, right? So I think that's changed. Like, we've been able to get very, very senior folks to, join in much more faster decision making, for sure. In terms of the process, otherwise, Manav, I think where it's also helped is ours is a solution sell, right? So there is a bunch of this piece around build a model, make people understand, and then you go in and do a good demo and sell, right? Where it's also helped is we're able to do a lot more with pre-sales and folks like sitting out of Bangalore, right? Which has meant I think overall smaller deal cycles. You're able to more senior folks are getting on calls more easily. I think that's something we've realized. I think those two are the big changes in the process. Otherwise, we've kept it similar. I mean, the show the value, do a strong demo and some of that. We haven't changed that as much in the process.
Right. And it
Also,
also
just add a couple of other points. I think the points that Aneesh made are absolutely valid. From my experience, I noticed two other things. One is the product company, the SaaS company, has ended up using this experience to sharpen their value proposition much more, because only the product has to speak right now. Because in the past, the relationship could give some air cover for some of the things that the product did not do, and convince them saying, I don't have it in this version, I'll do it in the next version, etc. So today the product company has to have a much more spends much more time to make sure its value proposition is much more sharper, because while people are available more easily for calls, they also lose their interest unless you really hang on to them and have a proposition that where you have invested to shown to the investment I understand what your problem is, and here is now my solution fits your problem and solves your problem for you there. So there is that, at least to that extent, there is that one difference to the sales process, because in the absence of any other air cover, your product and your value proposition has to stand for itself quickly. And because of the shorter life cycle in the sales process, you also need to hit those bullet points very, very quickly, because if you didn't, then they'll knock you out of the consideration set, and then you'll lose that opportunity with that customer for a near term at least there. So I see product companies preparing a lot more in terms of understanding the customer, positioning them. The decks get refined a lot more. The demo gets, what shall I say, dry run a lot more, including logistics, right? I mean, pre-pandemic, I have seen cases where companies would, not necessarily do dry runs. In the middle of the call, the internet line would drop, the demo would sort of, suddenly freeze some point. Things like that, which, the companies did and still got away with it. You don't have any of those kind of what shall I say, leeway anymore. So I think some of the muscle in terms of making sure the demo executes perfectly and so on and so forth have also happened, which anyway I guess improve. Think of this as resistance training, right? So you're working against the resistance, so therefore you build stronger muscles. So that in my opinion has also happened during the pandemic.
And do you think, Bhanu, that's we're discussing this sales process. Do you think that Indian companies will get any advantage over the US and the European and the global counterparts because of this sales process, or actually more?
Would they be at a more advantageous position versus others? I think the point that I made, Manav, earlier. I think the world is much flatter now. When I think of going out there, I do feel even, and especially again depending on what kind of industry you are in, the less digitized it is, the more the need for high touch relationship oriented sales. Although I am a firm believer that over a period of time everybody would move to the sort of same model where it's going to be all about the product. It might be a few years away in some other countries, but in US we've already achieved that. So I do not believe the pandemic has necessarily put Indian companies at a larger advantage. I think I think for in the US, I think, like I said, it's a very, very logical purchase that people do. Relationships do matter, but I think as period goes on, more and more it's about the value you're driving. And there's a very interesting book also around this, that not all buyers make rational decisions, but I do believe for the most case in the US, they do make rational decisions and driven by value. So I'm unclear. I do think our Indian company is going to benefit from the fact that, to Aneesh's point earlier, that you can actually close deals more remotely and you don't really need to travel and it's more efficient, etc. I think, yes, it's going to become easier, but I do think that advantage also happens to land with all, for instance, our competitors also, because we have competition all around the world, and they're benefiting as well as we are, for less of a need to actually be in person.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think word finally levels up, but I think the key point is we are starting with become easier. You can test it, and the first sales can be far. Moving on, Joyce, do you see that if I am creating a product for India business, for India SME, you would look at doing the GTM bit differently after a pandemic, or it will still be same the model that Tally has followed historically?
So, I mean, by historically, I would assume that you are referring to the partner-led,
Yeah.
sales and feet on street approach. Yeah, I think that remains a very very key component of our sales effort, and I definitely see that continuing. But I think the real adaptation for us needs to come in two big drives that we saw during the pandemic. One is that we definitely noticed our customers wanting to access financial data remotely much more than what they would have been asking for before the pandemic. And this is interesting because small enterprises, they generally tend to have the core of the financial data in one area, or maybe one physical, one geography area, and therefore this need to access the data and to access dashboards, reports on the go, on the fly, working from home, inside the country, multiple locations outside the country, is a big learning for us. So there is a bit of adaptation in terms of how we will sell and how the story gets built for this use case. The other thing, of course, is that if you look around, even from the government and compliance perspective, there are many new initiatives that are around the corner for businesses. The e-invoicing, for example, is one such use case, which is currently, it actually got implemented from 1st of January for companies which are 100 crore plus, and eventually the plan is that for all companies this is something that will be applicable from 1st of April. And similar to GST, we do believe that this is something which will impact every single business in the country, and it will involve adoption of more and more digital tools, a lot more interaction with government portals, and therefore the nature of the selling will become a lot more consultative. One has to have an idea of the nature of business of the customer or the prospect before one even engages in a pre-sales conversation. So these are, I think, some of a couple of things which come to mind in answer to your question.
Got it. I understand. And Sparsh, do you think that the whole pandemic giving you advantage over your competition in GTM?
I think, as Bhanu said, I don't think it is giving us an advantage. What probably it has done is taken away some of the disadvantages that we had in this space. And the disadvantage really is that, we operate in a global ecosystem, global space, and competitions everywhere. And the advantage that our competition had was they were closer to our end customers. And we sell to a lot of people in the US and Europe. And our competitors were more closer to the customers than we were. And because of this advantage, we were forced to be a lot more feet on the street, and we had more costs of making people travel and be closer to customers. Now, pandemic has removed this disadvantage. And again, as Bhanu said, the word is more flattened now, that our competition has the same access to competition as we have now, and there's no sort of parity. There's no disproportion in the access to customers. I don't think there's any other advantage that this has done. The only advantage I have to call out is the cost structure now, because everything is happening remotely and everything is happening digitally. Just because we're based out of India and our workforce is based out of India, we have this cost advantage, whereas some of our competitors and others in the industry who are doing very similar work based out of Europe or US probably has the costs are different than ours. So I think that's only on the cost side that I see an advantage doing the similar work. Obviously, not discounting the fact what Aneesh and Bhanu also pointed out on the cultural aspect of your team to be, the cultural aspect is super important. I think it starts making a lot more, impact if you're operating in an enterprise space where people expected a lot of wine and dine and feet on street. We were still in this ecosystem where we could manage digitally. We were doing a lot of feet on the street just to secure the deal more. If I ask, was it impossible to do a deal digitally in the past? No, of course not. We've done it in the past. It's just that, we will always make people fly and meet the customers just so that our confidence in the deal is higher. So I think those are the sort of changes I've seen where some of the disadvantages we had are removed. And, obviously cost is becoming a slightly bigger advantage, but doesn't help in growing the company further. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sparsh. So that brings to a classic question, Aneesh, and I'll ask you. We have discussed it many times, and a lot of startups actually. So if you're hiring a VP of sales or first sales hire, so would you do it outside of India or in India? When the pandemic is changing things.
This is for me, right? Manav, sorry, your voice is breaking a bit. So this is a question for me.
Yeah, a question for you. If you're hiring the VP of sales or the first sales hire, a lot of startups, struggle with that question. That how do I make my first sales hire? Should I go outside of India, go to US, whichever your market is? And now with pandemic, we can do things remotely, we can sell remotely. Would you do the first sales hire in India, or you still go with the previous model of hiring the salesperson in the job that you're focused on?
I have an answer out of experience of the last 4 months. As I said, we just opened the US like barely 3, 4, 5 months ago.
Right.
And everyone, it was just like the world is flat, right? Like right out. And we got our first hire for the next employee of ours. Why do you need to hire, right? I mean, if you're having people sitting here and they can log in remotely and sell, right? So we got our best sales guy to just start looking at the US. At least my experience, Manav, has been and we've now coupled him with someone like a VP of sales out of the US. And I've seen magic happen after that. Right, the first 3-6 months when this individual was just, we could generate leads, calls were happening, meetings were happening, but I think the fact that we could get, a senior guy locally also join a call in, I think made significant difference in at least success rates we've seen in the last 4-6 weeks. Right, and probably it applies to enterprise or applies to our sector like retail, which is retail or consumer is a fairly old sector, right? I mean. But I would say, look, I think you can make do with a very efficient team from here and a few very good folks at the front, right? So and it gives you a lot of advantage because eventually the best guys are now looking at your product. Earlier they would just come for a dinner, right? So in that sense, that is a big change, right? The wine and dine is out, right? So and hence, if you have a good product and if you're able to tick box that that we are serious about you, we have a senior guy, and use the team here which can really talk about the product very well or talk about the use cases very well. So my answer would be hire sales guys here, but hire a VP in the US. Hire a senior guy in the US, but hire sales guys here.
Perfect. What about you, Bhanu? How would you do your first hire if you had to start all over again, or if you're advising a startup, what would you tell them on the sales hire?
Did you ask me, Manav?
Yes.
Okay. So I am a very firm believer that if you're starting out and you're under sort of $1 million ARR, I do believe that the founder needs to wear that hat and really maybe try to get like a few salespeople under their belt and train them and help them scale, and hopefully one of them potentially can take that mantle. But really, up to $1 million, definitely a founder. 1 to sort of 10, maybe a founder with some key good sales guys, enterprise sales guys, and then beyond 10 million, I think you can look at hiring like a proper VP of sales. Now, I think it's a very interesting question that you asked, whether you would hire them here or whether you would hire them. I don't know, it depends. And not only does it depend on the industry, it depends on, what stage are you in. I think, Manav, you're aware, in our company, we now have a CEO. I'm no longer the CEO. Our CEO sits in the US. And so, it's also a very, very active ingredient in kind of decisions we make on senior hires. And, I think generally speaking, you have the benefit of, working more closely together. I know nobody can right now in these days, but I'm a big fan of being around people and having that water cooler talks, and I do think a lot of that is required for sort of whiteboarding, brainstorming, and all of that. And so, if you're a senior team, as much as possible, they need to be sort of together, in my opinion. So, in our case, I think now that our CEO, we do find a lot of our senior leadership moving towards the US.
Okay. So we're in the last segment of this panel now. I think about 8-9 minutes left. So I will ask one final question to all of you. And Rostow, you have seen the services. You have now gone to SaaS and selling to enterprises. So how do you see the India SaaS product opportunity unfolding now? What are your advice or thoughts on somebody who's starting new or somebody who's already in the industry? What would you leave them with?
Three quick comments, one on a lighter vein, because I think now we start wrapping up. One of the interesting things about this current sort of world is that we all get to see each other's houses, right? So at least it looks like we are sort of getting a peek into Manav's bedroom and Sparsh's drawing room, etc. there. So we all get to see each other's houses, even though we've never been to each other's houses physically. So we get to see that there. But on a more serious note, a couple of points. I think it's also important to recognize that while some of the points that we've discussed in terms of the benefits of the current pandemic and the GTM approaches and how each company has evolved and what has worked and all of that, I think it's also equally important to recognize that there are some problems that are also already sowed into the current approaches. For example, people are struggling to work at home. They don't have segregated spaces. Like if it's a family of say 4 people, both the adults are working, kids are in school, infrastructure, bandwidth, good chairs and tables. Many things are also not ideal for this world. So I think it's also important to keep a log of all the problems also that people are facing before we fall in love with the current model and we think the productivity increases and the benefit of not traveling, etc. Instead of hard baking them into the forecast and into the sort of the business plans, I think it's also important to recognize that this situation and how we are approaching it also has certain lacuna, and we need to be conscious of that as well there. But other than that, I think the two things that have improved, which hopefully will continue without we losing track of it. One is, as long as the product company, whether it's a SaaS or a product company or a services company or whatever, as long as they continue that effort to be very, very razor sharp in their value proposition. And some of the panel members have already spoken about this, right? Who is your customer? What is their pain point? How does your solution address that pain point, etc.? As long as that refinement happens continuously, I think that will be a benefit to the company because it's obviously a good thing to happen. Secondly, as long as you make it as friction-free as possible for the customer to engage with you, whether it's automated touch points, automated deployment, ease of use, billing, revenue tracking, everything else. Some of the things that SaaS and product companies have done today, as long as they continue to keep refining on it, that is good. Because that advantage that this model has brought to us should not be lost. I mean, a crisis is too good an opportunity to lose. So I think some of the lessons that we have learned, I think if we can imbibe in them, make it a way of life, and make it long acting, then that will be a great advantage for the product company.
Thanks, Rostow. Joyce?
So my view here is that, and just taking from the very important point that Rostow said, which is that I think while there are opportunities which have emerged from the pandemic, I think that it's important to also recognize the problems and the not so good things also which have emerged. And I think we need to also kind of at some point accede to the fact that every country and every economy will emerge from this at a different pace. And in terms of where you go out to seek your customers and what strategy you therefore adopt in a particular country will depend largely on how close your ears are to the ground, how closely you are listening to your customer, And I think at the end of it, as during all times, the customer will continue to have the final say, and we should be alert and aware to what they are saying.
Thanks, Sparsh.
So yeah, I mean, I think completely agree with Rostow that there's a lot of challenges that have been brought up. But as entrepreneurs, you always look at challenges and opportunities also. So completely agree to the fact that working remotely has a lot of challenges. Our physical spaces are not built, especially in India and globally also. For a working environment. But that's really an opportunity for a lot of businesses. Getting started now. There's a lot of different challenges that they can solve. And completely agree with Joyce also that there's even if the pandemic subsides and eventually the economy will come back, but it will have a very different sort of trajectory, and the new normal would be very different from what the normal used to be before the pandemic started. So the agility of these companies, agility of all of us to adapt to new normal will really prove how successful we are. So there will be shifts of companies who are very successful because their business models were very successful in the pre-COVID world might not be as successful in the post-COVID world if they're not agile. So, for everybody starting up and all the businesses, I think agility is super important, as well as keeping their eyes and ears open on new opportunities and new problems. Is super important for them to really survive in the post-COVID world and take advantage of the pandemic and the shift it has done. The digitalization, I think, is one of the biggest advantage that I see personally in our industry. Digitalization was anyways happening, and we cater to a lot of e-commerce and travel, retail, software companies. But I think pandemic has really accelerated that process. Something which would have happened in, let's say, in 3, 4, 5 years has just happened in 1 year. The surge for digitalization has been so much. But a lot of vendors were not completely ready for the surge. Nobody really expected such sort of demand in the market, which really meant that there's a forced fit sort of fitment of technologies also happening. Technologies like Zoom, which was not meant to conduct conferences at scale, were also used to do conferences, and so on and so forth. So which again has a lot of opportunities for new companies to tap into and see. Even if large players there will be parts of those large players which can be a huge opportunity for other people.
Perfect. Aneesh?
I think it's remote work has brought its own issues, but I do think it's been a bigger advantage than disadvantage, right? Personally, at least I feel that strongly. Like what we did very early was we gave everyone $100 to $150 to set up a home office, right, wherever you are, and we haven't had too many complaints on that afterwards, right? So we now have a courier service where if your laptop gets spoiled, you get one in 2 days, right? So we've had to work around some of those issues, but and I now really have a fear whether my folks are going to come back and work from office, right? I really think it will be moving a mountain to get people back to office now, right? And at least for us, it's coming from a sector which is fairly back-end, fairly face-to-face heavy. We've seen, like even opening the US up in such a short time, I don't think I would have done it if but for the pandemic or but for remote, right? So I don't know. Like I would say, I think it only increases our chances. I definitely think it only increases our chances of succeeding as companies from India.
Thanks, Aneesh. And finally to you, Bhanu.
So Manav, I want to make sure I got the question right. I think you asked what is the future of Indian product SaaS, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I'll start with making a very audacious remark. I think the country has 5 or 6 product SaaS unicorns. I predict in the next 5 years we'll have 50 unicorns in product SaaS space, including all of us, right? And really the reason I believe that we're really on the tipping point is if you think about what takes to make this industry or any industry successful is first off the people, right? So I think there has just been a revolution in that area given now we have a bunch of companies that have been very successful, but more importantly, the amount of capital that's gone into sort of consumer internet companies, and quite frankly, a lot of that is transferable skill from a product perspective in a B2B space. And I do think, the B2B does follow B2C, at least in terms of sort of user behavior and interaction on the product itself. So there's people available. We all know there is ton of capital available. And for all the audience attending, please go to Manav. He's the money bags amongst us. And the big fund. So if you want money, go to Manav. And I think now we have established networks as well. There is, mentors available. You have a bunch of people who have been there, done that, and offering to help. And lastly, I think just the underlying, theme, right? Like I alluded to earlier, world is much flatter now, and I do think that this whole new product-led framework that's coming into being, it'll create a huge advantage for Indian product SaaS companies for being able to deliver value to whatever segment they go after. So,
thanks, Bhanu. I think the way I see it, I think the opportunity is historic in many ways. I think there's a tectonic shift. Every single workflow in enterprise is getting digitized, right? Or say going on cloud. So I think that is the biggest opportunity. And when the opportunity arises, I think India has a huge advantage just because we have so much of skilled workforce now. And you can pretty much, with infrastructure available from Amazon, Microsoft, and all the cloud providers, you can actually pretty much start coding your first app, within a few months. I've seen teams bringing the first app in 3 to 4 months time and test your hypothesis in $250,000, $500,000, and then you can scale from there. So these two points put together is a huge opportunity for India. Previously, it was only a cost advantage, which really doesn't translate for a product or a SaaS company because people are looking at the value proposition and the product is really solving the pain point or not. But I think that two things are now flat for Indian people, and we have many more, and we have young and hungry people who want to try and fail. I think we saw that in B2C. I think now B2B is and another advantage of B2B is not winners take all. So you have many winners. So right, absolutely. There'll be many more unicorns, and everybody will have a pie, have a stake in the ground, and they can see this is my part, and I'm the winner of this hill, and they'll be large enough to grow and sustain and create a lot of wealth and job opportunities for everybody. So thank you very much. I think a lot of interesting thoughts.
One last comment, otherwise NASSCOM will be very unhappy with me. For all the product companies who are listening to this session, if you are not yet a NASSCOM member, please go up and sign up and become a NASSCOM member soon. The value you get is not just events like these, and NASSCOM supports product companies in many ways. So if you're not yet a NASSCOM member, please sign up for NASSCOM.
Yeah, everybody loves. That's what they're. All of us love NASSCOM, Rostow. But so coming back, thank you very much, all of you. I think it's a great discussion from PL to how the hiring would change, how the sales process would change, and how the buying behavior is changing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.